Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1436. The topic is nutrition, and the title is 3 Tips for Greater Leanness and Muscularity. So I apologize if there's some background music. I'm doing this outside today, but I think you'll still be able to hear me. What we're going to do today is I just want to talk about if somebody wanted to get leaner but also maximize the amount of muscle tissue that they had, what are some steps they could do nutritionally that are beyond kind of the basics. So we cover the basics of nutrition in podcast 1232. It's a nutrition podcast titled Start Here. So we actually talk through how to set up a healthy way of eating that would be for goals of fat loss or strength building or building muscle mass. It would just be basically foundations for any good diet. And it talks about calories being the most important thing that you want to control, like kind of calories per day, and make sure that's consistent and it matches your needs. Protein is the second most important thing, and again, that it's consistent and it matches your needs. And then once you control calories and protein kind of per day, and you have that be accurate to what your needs are, and you have it be consistent from day to day for the most part, what you want to then get into is kind of distribution. You want to kind of time that out, and that would be kind of meal timing. It doesn't matter necessarily how many meals you have a day. Whatever fits into your schedule, is great. The more often you eat, it does kind of help better control energy levels, and you can have less volume per meal, which then actually helps digestion for most people. So more meals tends to be a good thing, but that's not. There's tons of studies that show that you can get great results with only 2 or 3 meals a day versus people who do 5 or 6. I do favor more often, having people eat more often because of the side effects of how you feel. So it might not be a significant factor in regards to, say, weight change, but it is more of a significant factor to how you feel while your weight is changing. So I do like that. But what you get into after you do calories per day and protein per day is meal timing, and you try to distribute that out to match your activity level. One of the ways that I set that up for clients is to do what's called thirds. Sorry, there's a helicopter coming past here. Some days you just got to do what you got to do to make things work. So let's give that a second. Sorry about that. So what you would do is you try to match the intake of your calories and protein to your activity. And one of the ways I start with clients is to do what's called thirds. So for the first 5 to 6 hours of being awake, they should have a third of their calories and protein. The second 5 to 6 hours of being awake, they should have another third of their calories and protein. And then the final 5 to 6 to 7, whatever hours of being awake, they should have the remaining 1/3 of their calories and protein. Most people undereat during the day and they overeat at night. That causes the body to prioritize and basically need body fat. So we talk about this in a podcast titled Balancing the Books. I'm going to look up that number for you real quick. But it's podcast 1344. If you undereat when you're active, your body has to pull from reserves, body fat, for energy. The more often it has to do that, and to the greater degree in which it has to do that, the more value it places on body fat. So if I'm always having to dip into my savings, financial savings, then that makes, sense that my financial savings are very important to me. If I'm always spending kind of at what I make and I never use my savings, then I would be more kind of lenient to use my savings towards an investment or towards something else, right? So our body is the same way with body fat. In a sense that if we're constantly dipping into body fat to provide for daily energy, the body's going to want to replace the body fat that was lost, but also it's going to want to put even more back as a form of protection. So if I can get clients to eat a third of their total calories within the first third of being awake, that's going to help a lot to provide energy to match the daily needs. Now, ideally, what we'd want is we want calories floating kind of around what we need. So that way it picks off a little bit of body fat here and there, but the body doesn't fight to try to replace that. So it's a very controlled, very small deficit that we want to have calorically at the right times. Now, leading into a time of activity such as a workout, you don't want to be in a caloric deficit. You want to be in a little bit of a surplus, because that's going to give you tons of energy to actually do the workout. And in our workouts, we create stress to the body that then our body responds by creating adaptations. So the greater I fuel the workout, the greater I feel during my workout, the greater change stimulus that I create within the workout. So having calories per day and protein per day is great. Then distributing that out by thirds is a great idea as well. Once you have that, there are kind of deeper details to get into. Now, for most people, just doing what I just said so far is going to be a lot of work, and it might be the best they get to. And that's okay, because you're probably only wanting to look as good as doing that would get you. What I mean by that is, if you're not planning on getting on stage with, veins on your abs, you don't need to do the rest of what I'm going to talk about in today's podcast. Can you if you want to? Sure. But if you're happy with, as Kevin James, one of the stand-up comedians, a guy from King of Queens, said, he just wants his belly to shake less when he brushes his teeth. If that's kind of your goal, then everything I've said so far is all you're going to need, by far, to look great and feel great. But if you are looking for what are the deeper details, what's the next steps I can get into, there are 3 tips that I'd like to share. Now, the first tip is to make your distribution even more extreme. I do have one of the clients that I have following this type of parameters, because he wants to look freaking amazing, and he's willing to give all of his effort and time to it. And he's very dedicated, very awesome, great work ethic, great guy, wants to be tons of muscle, be super lean, so he's doing all this. So we're going to be referencing kind of his example. But what you would do with the distribution is you'd make it a little more extreme to better match your activity. So we talked about the third, and it's kind of equal in all kind of sections of the day. What I then have somebody move to is we still use 3 sections of the day. Again, like every 5 to 6 hours is like one section. Now, within the 3 sections, though, we signify one of the sections to have more calories and protein than the other sections. So what we get into is we do what's called half quarter. What this means is the 5 to 6 hour block that you would perform your workout, in that 5 to 6 hour block, you want to have half of your daily calories and protein. And yes, this is doable. I have I've found people get pro cards, drug tested and non-tested for aesthetics, and they do this all the time. So it is doable. It takes effort, absolutely, but it's doable. So what they do is in the 5 to 6 hours that they're going to have their workout, they consume half their daily calories and protein. Now, sometimes we make further modifications, but this is just a good general kind of next step. But the idea of this is, you might say, how in the hell am I going to hit half my daily calories in 5 to 6 hours? Well, we use a lot of shakes. So they're going to have a pre-workout meal. Sometimes it's solid food. Sometimes it's more of like shakes or stuff like that, or easier to digest items. Depends on what time they train and what their activity is, like work-wise, before they train. Then we have an intra-workout drink, we have a post-workout drink, and then they also have a post-workout meal. So you have a chance to kind of eat before the workout, drink calories during the workout, and then also drink and eat calories after the workout. So you can absolutely do this. We do it all the time. But it does take some work to set it up. The idea, though, is by furthering the specificity of matching your calorie demands to your activity demands, it helps, again, just kind of reinforce the body has everything it needs energy-wise for the workout. Therefore, it doesn't have to dip into body fat, and therefore it has no need to maintain or keep body fat. So this is how you get people super shredded by just timing out when they're eating their calories and protein versus when they need their calories and protein. The more precise you can make that, the leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner a person gets. So this is extremely helpful to get somebody very lean, but also still fuel muscle maintenance, let alone actually building muscle. So that's the first tip, is to get even more detailed with your caloric and protein distribution. And as I said, we use half quarter. So in the 5 to 6 hour block that they're going to be working out, that's half the calories and protein. In the other 2 5 to 6 hours of being awake, they do a quarter. So a fourth of their calories and protein in one of them, and then a fourth of their calories and protein in the other. Now, I do manipulate this even more so from here, but that's a great kind of next step if you want to try that. Digestive timing is also ridiculously important, and that way, again, when you eat is just like, okay, I put the food in my face now, but when does my body actually get to use the food? And that relates to digestive timing. So there's very helpful elements when we talk to about like digestion rates. So let me look up. We have an old podcast with good information, but it's an older podcast. It's podcast 216, so it's quite a while ago. If you have trouble finding our old podcast, just Google search Podbean Brutal Iron Gym. On that homepage, on the right side of the page in the middle of the screen, you'll see a search function, and you can just type in 216, and the title is Nutrition, Protein Digestion, and Type Selection. So you can just type in protein digestion, and you'll see that. So protein digestion is like when your foods digest, the rate in which they digest, when they're available within the bloodstream, is very important in regards to kind of getting that when you eat to actually matter. So if I eat a steak for breakfast, steak takes forever to break down, and you're not going to get a high influx of protein into the bloodstream, and that would be really important in the morning because you just woke up from being fasted, for 6 to 8 hours. So you want to get proteins in the bloodstream and get ahead of the day with like maintenance, repairs, and whatnots. So it's important to eat proteins that digest quickly in the morning. So you want to eat protein sources that digest within, say, 2 hours or less. And that could be like whole eggs, egg whites. There's, some other options out there as well. But it's usually very lean meats. And then, or lean dairy products. So like, Greek yogurt is a relatively quick digesting protein source. So there's differing types of protein sources, which is why I would encourage you to listen to podcast 216, so that way I don't have to make this podcast any longer, try to go through all that information as well. So check that out. But in the morning, you want to have fast digesting proteins, especially the first meal of the day. Then throughout kind of the middle of the day, you want to have medium digesting proteins that digest within, say, 2 to 5 hours, somewhere in there. And then in the evening, you want to have slower digesting proteins, which are like 5+ hour digestion rates, because that way, as you sleep, the protein is being slowly broken down and released into your bloodstream. So timing out and having food selection specific to your timing is another element that we would get into for clients. So I do this. They might not know that I do this, but I'll give them suggestions and say, hey, for this meal, why not have chicken breast? I think that would be a better meal for you here. And, we talk through it, and I kind of give them different suggestions if I see things not matching right. So some of the clients, if they're doing stuff right, I don't bother telling them because they're focusing on so many other things. I don't want to add to their plate if they're already doing something right. So protein digestion is something that you can maximize to get better results. And again, you'd want faster digesting protein in the morning, medium digesting protein midday, and then slower digesting protein in the evening. And you can listen to podcast 216 to kind of learn more about which protein sources would match that goal. Now, the other factor to consider is what you pair your protein with will impact the digestion rate of the protein. So if I have a very lean, very fast, so if I have a very fast digesting protein, say a whey protein powder, but I mix it with something high in fat, say peanut butter. That is peanut butter, the fat in the peanut butter is going to slow down the digestion of the protein. So it's no longer a fast digesting protein, it's more of like a medium to slow digesting protein because the fat slows everything down. So whether you pair carbs or fats with your protein, it does impact the digestion rate of the protein. This means that the faster you want the protein to digest, if you're pairing that with an energy nutrient, such as carbs or fats to provide energy within that meal as well as the protein, you want to pair it with carbs. So fast digesting protein should be paired with carbohydrates or eaten on its own. Medium digesting protein should be eaten with probably mostly carbs, maybe a little bit of a mix of fats, and then slower digesting protein is better paired with fats. Now, this isn't something you have to do 100% on point, but if your ratio of carbs to fats favors the correct kind of distribution, it's going to help that meal better serve its purpose. So a little bit of fats in the middle of a midday meal is not the end of the world, but if you have a ton of fat with your protein source in the middle of the day, that meal is going to digest very slowly. You might feel kind of bloated because you're not really hungry later on, but you're supposed to eat. So all of a sudden, you now have the last meal still digesting in your belly. Now you put another meal on your belly. So timing out this stuff can really help you feel a lot better, feel less bloated. The third tip is caloric cycling. So We've talked about this in a billion other ways, but caloric cycling is very helpful in the sense that the idea of how many calories we eat is to match our caloric needs. So I want to eat, 2,000 calories a day because I'm active enough to use 2,000 calories a day. Well, if I have a training day and a non-training day, I'm going to be more active on training days and less active on non-training days, right? So therefore, my calories should be different. A good podcast to learn about that is podcast 857. It's a nutrition podcast titled Caloric Cycling to Break Through Plateaus. So really good podcast there. And that would help you break through a plateau of fat loss or muscle building or strength building or anything like that. So podcast 857. Podcast 857. So typically, I only have about a 200 to 300 calorie difference for most of my clients between a training and non-training day. Because for most people, they're going to burn roughly about 200 to 300 calories in their workouts. Can they burn out more? Sure. But what this is it kind of blends the good and the bad of being, a little underfed one day, a little overfed one day, and it kind of blends it out and makes it to where they're not having huge drastic differences, where if they overeat on a training day, they're actually getting fat, and if they undereat on a non-training day, their body's going to get more stressed and try to hold on to extra calories. They're going to feel kind of super hungry and have cravings, and then all of a sudden the next day, if there's a training day, their calories go all the way back up. Their body's going to try to store all those extra calories to replace the fat that had to burn the previous day. So it's better for them to have a smaller variance from training to non-training day than to have too big of a variance. So that's why for most clients I only have a 200, 300 calorie difference. Now, for the people who are kind of more advanced athletes and who want to really peak and maximize their leanness and muscularity, we do have a larger difference between training day and non-training day. And this is typically because their training is a greater volume, therefore it burns significantly more calories, so we can start to play with larger windows. Some of those clients I have between 400 to 800 calorie differences between training and non-training days. Now, typically, protein doesn't change much. For most people, I don't change protein from training day to non-training day at all. The idea is they have enough-ish protein on their training day to match the training needs and the breakdown of that day. And then by leaving it still the same for the non-training day, hopefully there's a little bit of extra above what their body really needed that day to help prepare from the day before. But for more advanced athletes, we really push the protein on training days really high. Up to like 1.25 gram per pound of body weight. And then that allows us then on non-training days to bring that down some because they just don't need it. And it gives them a little bit of a break from trying to force feed themselves with that many calories. So an example of one of my people who are following this kind of parameter is their training day is 3,500 to 3,700 calories. But their non-training day is only 2,600 to 2,800. So you can see there that there's a 900 calorie difference between the 2 days. Then their protein is 230 to 260 grams on a training day, but only 150 to 200 grams on a non-training day. And then their distribution on training days is half, quarter, but their distribution on non-training days is a third. What this allows them is on their training days, they really freaking maximize the nutritional elements to get the absolute most from those days. On the non-training days, we still eat enough calories to provide growth, but not so much that there's excess that's going to limit like fat loss. We provide enough protein to manage the needs of that day and actually a little bit more, but we're not going to have a total big amount that wears them out trying to force feed that in every day. And then by distributing out to a third, that better matches that day because they're not working out that day. They don't have a high activity in one singular window. And it also allows them a little bit of mental relaxation from that half, quarter. So the idea is the non-training day feels easier to them, but it's still 100% adequate to everything that they would need out of that day. So their non-training day is kind of like what everybody else's best day is. And then their training day is that next level, that next step up. So if you're consistent with your calories and protein, and you pay attention to kind of making sure you eat during the day so it's not all piled in at night, and you're thinking, what else can I do? The next steps could be One, two, or all three of these tips is change your distribution to the half quarter quarter. Really emphasize digestive timing of your foods. Try to eat faster digesting proteins and carbohydrates in the beginning of the day, then slowly transition into slower digesting proteins and fats later in the day. And then also make your caloric cycling a little more extreme on training versus non-training days. Awesome. Well, if you need any help setting this up, just reach out. Our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. We do offer a nutrition coaching service for just $100 a month, where I set all this up for you and I check in with you every week and tell you how you're doing. Pretty good service there. And then for an extra $100, so for $200 a month, I'll write your training programs, and that includes exercise videos, tutorials, everything being personalized, the equipment you have, the schedule you have, all that good stuff. So if you want help with all this, I'm here. I'm happy to help. But I hope through this podcast you provided a lot of information that you can use on your own. So that's the idea, is I want to educate and teach everybody everything that you need to do it. But if you want some help with it, that's what I'm here for as well. Awesome. Well, if you like today's podcast, please consider sharing it. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help. And that's the whole goal. If you share it on social media, that reaches the most amount of people. But even just sharing a conversation with somebody is great as well. I just appreciate that you share it, because that way it makes a greater impact into the world. So thank you. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, the people who financially support the podcast. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day. I try to make it work, even if I have to be outside of a building with helicopters. So I am giving my best to this. I believe it's helpful, and I appreciate everybody's support. So thank you for the financial donations. It does help cover some of the cost, which is greatly appreciated. Thank you. If you want to give, you can do so at our website. You can sign up to do like a one-time donation or a small monthly donation, a small yearly donation. Anything you can give, it absolutely does help. It does. Our website is www.brutalirongym.com if you want to give. Also, if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.